Hi, TUMNAD lectures. In today's video, we are going to be talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. If it's your very first time to watch me, please make sure you subscribe. You put on the notification bell so that whenever I load the video, you become the very first person to watch. So let's go ahead and get started and look at what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, what is parasympathetic nervous system? First of all, it's going to be a branch of the autonomic nervous system. We have the sympathetic nervous system and then the parasympathetic nervous system. Previously, we have been talking about the sympathetic nervous system. Now we are going to be talking about the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, this parasympathetic nervous system is going to be activated whenever we are at rest and we feel that we want to digest. That's why the parasympathetic nervous system can also be called rest and digest. Okay? It can also be called, you may find some other terms like rest, and digest. Okay? These are some of the most important common terms which are going to be meeting. Okay? Now, we need first to know, where do we find the sympathetic nervous system within the central nervous system? That is something which is very important for us to know before we can know any other thing about the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, previously we talked about that we are going to be finding the parasympathetic nervous system. Part of it is going to be part of the cranium, and then another is going to be part of what we call the sacral area, making what we call the crania-sacral outflow. That's what we said, where we're going to be finding the cell bodies of the preganglion motor fibers, where they are going to be coming out from. Okay, so now you're going to be having them, some of them coming from the brain stem, which is part of the cranium, and then also some fibers coming from what we call the sacral region. Collectively is what we call the crania-sacral outflow. But generally, we're going to be having some fibers coming along with this kind of this cranial nerve, and this cranial nerve which comes off from here is what we call cranial nerve number. They're going to be running with what we call cranial nerve number 3. We shall also have some other parasympathetic fibers coming with cranial nerve number 7, and then also cranial nerve number 9, and then also cranial nerve number 10. That is for the case of the cranial area. Then we also have the parasympathetic fibers coming from the sacral area, primarily from S2, S3, and then S4. So we also have fibers going to be coming from S2, S3, and then also S4. So now this one collectively is what we call the craniosacral outflow. We have the parasympathetic fibers which are going to be coming out from these areas, craniosacral area. Okay. So now let's go ahead and see how is the parasympathetic nervous system, how is it going to be activated. You know, the main regulator of the parasympathetic nervous system, or generally the autonomic nervous system, is going to be this guy here whom we call the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is going to be a regulator of autonomic functions. What do I mean by this? Now, the hypothalamus is going to be having control of the sympathetic and then also the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning that if we need to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, we need to have the parasympathetic portion of the hypothalamus being giving off the signals. Okay, when it gives off the signals, for example, you're going to be having some of these fibers, and these fibers can run through the brain stem, and they move down throughout the spinal cord up to the sacral area. So now they are going to be now giving off stimulations to this nucleus. They're also going to be stimulating this kind of the nucleus. They're also going to be stimulating this nucleus. We're also going to be having stimulation of this nucleus. And also we shall have stimulation of what we call these kind of cell bodies within the sacral area, primarily in what we call the intermediate lateral horns. Okay. Now we want to see, how do we call these kind of the nucleus that are going to be giving us the preganglion motor fibers that are going to be moving with different types of the cranial nerves I've just talked about. Now, this kind of the nucleus here, this nucleus which is going to be red, is what we call the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. Now, we are going to be having what we call the oculomotor nerve. Okay, so now if we have the oculomotor nerve, within the oculomotor nerve, we are going to be having parasympathetic fibers which are going to be coming from this kind of the nucleus, which we are calling the Edinger-Westphal nucleus. So now these preganglion motor fibers are going to be coming off through what we call the cranial nerve number 3, and then they move. Now, when they move, you're going to be having them terminating in this ganglion. Now, you're going to be having this ganglion, and this ganglion is what we call the ciliary ganglion. Okay, so now from there, we're going to be having now the postganglionic motor fibers, which are going to be coming out. Now, the question is, these postganglionic motor fibers, where are they going to innervate? That's also another point to know, okay? Now, we are going to be having these postganglionic motor fibers coming off from what we call the ciliary ganglion. So now this one here is going to be now our ciliary ganglion, okay? Ciliary ganglion. So now they are going to be innervating different parts of what we call the eye. Now, what are these parts that are going to be innervated by these postganglionic motor fibers from the ciliary ganglion? Now, we need to know whenever we are at rest, we want to digest. What's going to be happening to the size of the pupil, and what's going to be happening to the ciliary muscles, and what's going to be happening to the shape of the lens. That's what we want to know, okay? Now, we're going to be having these fibers which are going to go and innervate what we call the ciliary muscles. Okay? These fibers are going to innervate what we call the ciliary muscles. Okay? So now, what's going to be happening to the ciliary muscles whenever parasympathetic nervous system is activated? We want them to contract. Okay? So the effect on the ciliary muscles is going to be contraction. Okay? Is going to be contraction. And by doing that, whenever the ciliary muscles contract, it is going to be now making the suspensory ligament to become a bit loose. Okay? The tension to the lens by the suspensory ligament is going to become loose. What does that one mean? It means you're going to be having now the lens becoming more globular. It's going to be becoming more round. And what is the significance of this? It is aiding at what we call near vision. Okay? It's going to be aiding in what we call near vision. Because we are at rest, we want to digest, we don't need to look very far. We need to see things which are very close to us, okay? That's why this is going to be having near vision by what we call contraction of the ciliary muscles, okay? Now, what's going to be happening to what we call the pupils? Now, we have again some of these fibers which are going to come and innervate. This is going to be now our front view of the eye. Now, when you see these muscles which are going to be outside, which are red, and these one which are blue. Now, those muscles collectively are they make what we call the iris. Okay. So now we have these ones which are outer, which we call the dilator pupillae, and then these ones which are bluish, which we call the sphincter pupillae. Now, parasympathetic effect does not have effect on the dilator pupillae, but it has effect on what we call the sphincter pupillae. Now, what's going to be happening to the sphincter pupillae? Okay, what's going to be happening on sphincter? What we call sphincter pupillae. Okay, sphincter pupillae. We need the sphincter pupillae to contract. Okay, we need the sphincter pupillae to contract. And what is the significance of it contracting? So now, when the sphincter pupillae contracts, now this is going to be aiding in what we call narrowing of what we call the pupil. And in that way, this will limit the amount of light which is going to be entering. Because we are at rest, we want to digest, we want to see things which are very close to us. We don't need the pupil to over-widen like during the sympathetic nervous system. So in that way, this one is also going to be aiding in what we call narrowing of the pupil. And all this one is going to be aiding in what we call the near vision. Okay, so now that's going to be now the parasympathetic effect on what we call the eyes. Okay, so now let's go ahead and see what's going to be happening on some other structures of the head. Okay, like for example the glands and even other structures. So now, when we come to the pons on the inferior aspect of the pons towards the pontomedullary junction, we have this nucleus. This nucleus is what we call the superior salivatory nucleus. Okay, so now this superior salivatory nucleus is going to be giving us fibers. It's going to be giving us parasympathetic fibers that are going to be moving with cranial nerve number 7, and this cranial nerve number 7 is what we call the facial nerve. So now, this facial nerve is going to be coming out through what we call the internal acoustic meatus, okay? And of course, this facial nerve, when it comes out, we are going to be having here another kind of the ganglion, okay? This ganglion here is what we call the geniculate ganglion, okay? And then from there, from this ganglion, we are going to be having these two branches, okay? We're going to be having these two branches. Now, what's going to be happening? we have the preganglionic motor fibers, which are going to be coming from the superior salivatory nucleus. They pass through this facial nerve, which we call the cranial nerve number 7. So now, the preganglionic motor fibers are going to be coming, and they come, and they come, and they come. So now, when they come out, you're going to be having some of these fibers passing this branch of what we call the facial nerve, and then we shall also have some other which are going to be passing this branch of the facial nerve. So now this one here is going to be what we call the greater petrosal nerve, which is going to be passing through what we call the pterygoid canal. Okay, so now these fibers are going to be moving and moving and moving, and then they are going to be synapsing in one of these beautiful ganglion. Okay, we shall talk about this type of ganglion. Again, these fibers which are going to be taking this branch of the facial nerve, which this one we call it the coda tympani. So now they are all going to be coming out, and then we are going to be having now them terminating or synapsing in this ganglion. So now we're also going to see what's the name of this ganglion. Okay, so now moving with this canal which we call the pterygoid canal, which is going to be giving us now where the superficial greater petrosal nerve is going to be coming. Now these preganglionic motor fibers, they are going to be now terminating this ganglion. How do we call this ganglion? This ganglion is what we call pterygopalatine. The pterygopalatine ganglion. Okay, it's what we call the pterygopalatine ganglion. From there now you're going to be having the postganglionic motor fibers. The question is, where are they going to go? These fibers are going to come generally and innervate this structure, which is going to be located on top of the eye, which we call the lacrimal gland. They're also going to be having some of these fibers which are going to be moving down on these nasal glands, and even also shall have these glands there which we call the palatine glands. So we shall also have some of these the fibers coming to innervate these what we call the palatine glands. So now the point is, the postganglionic motor fibers are going to be innervating the lacrimal glands. Okay, the lacrimal glands, they are going to be innervating what we call the nasal glands, and then even also what we call the palatine glands. So now it is going to be causing they are going to be stimulated to release their secretions. For the case of the lacrimal glands, they are going to be increasing what we call tear production. Okay, what we call tear production. And of course, these ones are also going to be having increased secretions. Okay, we are going to be having a couple of different secretions coming from what we call the nasal, and then the palatine glands. So now that was for the case of motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming from what we call the pterygopalatine ganglion. Then we also have this ganglion which we call the submandibular ganglion. Okay, submandibular ganglion. They are going to be coming with this branch of the facial nerve which we call the coda tympani. So now you're going to be having now the postganglionic motor fibers coming out, and this one, when they come out, they are going to come and innervate these glands. Okay, they are going to come and innervate these glands. Now, how do we call these glands? These glands we have the submandibular and then the sublingual salivary glands. So now you're going to be having these glands, which we call the sublingual, and submandibular. Okay, submandibular. So now what's going to be the effect, the parasympathetic effects? Are going to be increasing secretions. Okay, we're going to be increasing secretions. That's going to be the whole effect of the parasympathetic fibers on these sublingual and submandibular salivary glands. Okay, so now we also again have who is going to be now innervating this kind of salivary glands? You know, this kind of salivary gland is going to be now one of the major extrinsic salivary glands, which is going to be producing a bigger percentage of the saliva in our oral cavity. So now, who is going to be innervating this? We have this kind of the nerve. We have this the nerve which is going to be passing through what we call the jugular foramen. Okay, we have this of cranial nerve which is going to be passing through what we call the jugular foramen, which we call the glossopharyngeal nerve. So now, the glossopharyngeal nerve is going to be helping us to move with these preganglionic motor fibers coming from this nucleus. How do we call this nucleus? This nucleus is what we call the inferior salivatory nucleus. So now we are going to be having preganglion motor fibers moving along with cranial nerve number 9. They move and move and move. They come and terminate in this kind of this ganglion. So now these preganglion motor fibers moving along with cranial nerve number 9, which we call the glossopharyngeal nerve, they terminate on this kind of ganglion. How do we call this ganglion? This ganglion is what we call the otic. Okay, is what we call the otic ganglion. And then from there, the postganglion motor fibers are going to be coming out. They move and move and move. They come and innervate these glands. How do we call this gland? This gland is what we call the parotid salivary gland. Okay, this one is what we call the parotid salivary glands. And the whole essence of this is going to be increased secretions of the saliva. Okay, the effect is going to be increased in watery saliva. Okay, the effect is going to be increased production of the saliva, which is more watery. Okay, that's for the case of the parotid or the parotid gland. Okay, this is such another beautiful thing. Okay, so the last one. So now the last one, you have this nucleus. This nucleus is what we call the dorsal nucleus vagus. Okay, and this nucleus is going to be giving us the parasympathetic fibers. Actually, it's going to be giving us the bigger percentage of the parasympathetic fibers. The bigger effect of the parasympathetic fibers is going to be moving with this kind of, they're going to be coming from what we call the dorsal vagus nucleus. And they're going to be moving with what we call this kind of the cranial nerve number 10, which we call the vagus nerve. It's going to be passing through what we call the jugular foramen. And we're going to be having now what we call the preganglion motor fibers. Now, these preganglion motor fibers, through what we call cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve, they are going to go to very many body structures within the viscera. Okay, they're going to go into very many structures within the thoracic region. We shall talk about that one, into the GIT viscera, and even also some parts of what we call the pelvic region. It supplies a lot of different structures, leading into different physiological processes. So now this is going to be now our next video, which is going to be focusing on what we call the parasympathetic supply through the vagus nerve to different parts of the viscera. So let's have a very simple quick recap of what we have just said. Okay, we said that the parasympathetic nervous system is always going to be activated whenever you want to rest or digest. We said it's going to be coming from what we call crania-sacral outflow. It's going to be moving with the cranial nerve number 3, number 7, number 9, and number 10. We also said that we are going to be having now the parasympathetic fibers coming from the sacral region from S2, S3, and S4. Okay, which we called collectively as craniosacral outflow. Then we said that the main autoregulator of the autonomic nervous system is going to be the hypothalamus. Now, the hypothalamus is going to be having very many portions, including that which can regulate sympathetic and then parasympathetic nervous system. Now, whenever now the one for the parasympathetic nervous system is activated, if you send now down these fibers and activate all the different kind of the neuron cell bodies within the brainstem and even some part of the circle, they are all going to be stimulated. Now, when they stimulated, they're going to be having now the preganglion motor fibers of the parasympathetic nervous system coming out with this kind of these cranial nerves. We said that this is going to be now our ending our vascular nucleus, giving preganglion motor fibers that are going to be passing through what we call cranial nerve number 3, which is the oculomotor. Okay, which is going to be coming and then terminating this kind of the ganglion, which we call the ciliary ganglion, from where the postganglion motor fibers will come out and innervate the ciliary muscle contraction for the case of leading to what we call the near vision. We also have the innervation to what we call the sphincter pupilla, which will cause it to constrict, reducing the size of the pupil, which will lead also into the near vision. No one is chasing us. We want to see things which are very close. Okay, and we also say that we have this nucleus which we call the superior salivatory nucleus that's going to be giving us preganglion motor fibers through this kind of the cranial nerve number 7. Then we said that this cranial nerve is going to be coming here and it's going to be having this kind of this ganglion, which we call the degenerate ganglion, whereby we have two kind of these branches, which we call the superficial greater petrosa nerve, and then also what we call the caudate tympani. This is where our parasympathetic fibers are going to be passing out. Okay, now for the case of these fibers coming from what we call the pterygoid canal, they're going to be synapsing in this kind of the ganglion, which we call the pterygopalatine ganglion. from where the postganglion motor fibers will come and innervate the lacrimal glands, leading into lacrimation, even also secretion from what we call the nasal and then the palatine glands. Okay, and then also said that these kind of parasympathetic fibers that are going to be passing through what we call the chorda tympani, they are going to be terminating in what we call this kind of the ganglion, which we call the submandibular ganglion, from where the postganglion motor fibers will come out and innervate the salivary glands, which we call the submandibular and then the sublingual, leading into increased salivation process. Okay, that was for the case of cranial nerve number 7 from what we call the superior salivatory nucleus. Then we also said that we also have this kind of the nucleus, which we call the inferior salivatory nucleus, that their parasympathetic fibers are going to be moving with this cranial nerve number 9, which we call the glossopharyngeal nerve. And they are going to be coming and determinate this kind of this ganglion, which we call the otic ganglion, from where the postganglion motor fiber will come out and innervate this kind of the extrinsic salivary gland, which we call the parotid, leading into what we call saliva secretion, which is more water. Okay, and then the last one, we said that we also have this kind of the nucleus, which we call the dorsal vagus nucleus, that are going to be having the bigger percentage of the parasympathetic motor fibers coming with cranial nerve number 10, and they go and they supply different structures within the visceral. And that's going to be now our next part 2. We are going to be talking about the supply of these parasympathetic nerve fibers from the cranial nerve number 10 vagus to all other body parts. That's going to be our next part. Okay. Thank you very much for watching. It has been TUMNAD from the beginning up to now. And if you think whatever I've talked is making sense, is adding to your benefit, please make sure you like the video, comment down in the comment section, and subscribe. Thank you very much for watching. As always, until we meet next time.